did result in a lot of people who probably never would have gone into the criminal field doing exactly that. And even more remarkable than the fact that there were more criminals, there were a lot of typical Americans who were not as unsupportive of criminals as they might have been otherwise. You know, the Depression not only pretty much destroyed the economy, but it turned American sensibilities upside down as far as, you know, there were an awful lot of people in the United States who were sympathetic to these motorized bandits. You know, you hear comments about, you know, you'd admire anybody who could get money from a bank, one way or the other. So it was a troubled time, and these people were making do the best they could, and they were not entirely unsympathetic. I mean, if you look at some of the things, Dillinger was tremendously talented at seeking newspaper attention, and, you know, to some extent favorable attention because of his personality and some of his exploits. In fact, the criminals were followed in the newspapers almost like a winning baseball team might be followed. You know, wow, did you see the latest Dillinger exploit? Or did you see what Bonnie and Clyde did? And they were almost heroes, and that very much upset at least one man in Washington, Mr. Hoover. In fact, he repeatedly went to Congress to try to, you know, get a bigger budget, to get, for example, the right for bureau agents to be armed, to make arrests, which at one point in the Bureau's career they didn't have arrest powers, and basically to make them into a national police force. And, you know, given the circumstances, he got his budget, he got his powers, and he was able to wield up that power fairly successfully against what is in effect a handful of notable criminals like Dillinger and Floyd and so on. The Kansas City Massacre has always been troubling to me as far as feeling convinced that Charles Floyd was a participant in it. He may have been, but it was unlike him. It was unlike his prior career, which was pretty much restricted to robbing banks and nothing more than that. He wasn't employed by the big city gangs. He was more of an independent. So for him to participate in something like this, which of course was an attempt to release a recaptured gentleman who had strong ties with the Kansas City mob. And this would not have been somebody that Floyd would have associated with, worked for, or probably even known. But the idea was they knew he had been recaptured by the Bureau and other law enforcement people. They knew that he was coming back through Kansas City on his way back to prison. And some of the Kansas City criminal elements wanted to free him. So the thought, or the belief, the story put out by the Bureau was that Floyd and Ricchetti had arrived in Kansas City shortly before that and were hired along with Vern Miller, who did have connections with the Kansas City mob, were hired to free this man, this Frank Nash. And of course, they tried to do it with Thompson submachine guns and ended up killing Nash and I believe 4 law enforcement agents, including at least 1 FBI agent. Of course, after the Kansas City Massacre, when his name was jumped ahead of numerous other criminals because of his alleged connection with that bloodbath, he very quickly determined that he needed to lay low and to get out of the Midwest. He spent some time in the Cleveland area, but for the most part, he spent the better part of a year in Buffalo, New York, where he and his partner Adam Ricchetti and the 2 Baird girls rented an apartment and simply stayed there. Didn't rob banks to any knowledge that I've ever run into. Basically lived very, very quiet lives and just tried to stay out of the attention of the authorities, which was fairly successful. No one had any idea where they were until much later. And when the Bureau sent agents back to Buffalo, they were able to piece together a fairly complete story of, where they lived, what they did, who they rented from, and they lived a very quiet life, just hoping that things would calm down, that they could get back to business as usual. The suspicion is that after about a year, they couldn't stand it anymore, and decided to head back to Oklahoma. So they bought a car and were headed back to Oklahoma by going to back roads, the lesser known areas, which would perhaps explain why they were here. The other reason, of course, is that Richetti had family just south of here in Dillonvale in Jefferson County. And they were probably going to stop there for a period of time. There was a bank robbery down the river a day or so before the incident, the car crash here, so they may have spent some time going back and forth, although it's never really been proven that Floyd and Richetti were the robbers in that particular incident. But of course they had a car accident between East Liverpool and Wellsville, and then Floyd and Richetti were on foot from that point on. After Floyd had died on the Cockle farm, of course the first thing that Melvin Purvis did was borrow a car and go into the little village of Clarkson to phone Washington and to tell Hoover that they had succeeded in bringing Floyd to justice. They then packed Floyd's body into the back of one of the cars and drove him to East Liverpool, about 8 miles, and delivered him to the Sturgis Funeral Home, which Ernie Sturgis was the county coroner, so he would have to be the one to make any rulings as to the cause of death, or whether it required an inquest and whether or not testimony would be taken. So they took the body directly to his facility, and then the real circus started in East Liverpool, because while the body was in the embalming area of Sturgis's, numerous police officers were allowed to come in and be photographed with the body, including many officers who were not part of the posse, who were not part of the shooters on the Cockle farm, but just happened to be there, and it was a great opportunity. And how often do you shoot down public enemy number one in eastern Ohio? So there are dozens of photographs taken in the embalming room. When they had their chance, and when the doctors had completed their report, interestingly, he was embalmed before he was autopsied. They had their procedures a little bit backwards, but they did have 2 local doctors perform an autopsy and describe the wounds that caused death. Despite the requests made by Floyd's mother by telegraph, his body was taken up to one of the viewing rooms in the Sturgis Funeral Home, placed on a cot or a day bed, and covered with a crushed velvet or crushed velour cover up to his chin, and basically the public was admitted. And the estimates are anywhere from 10 to 15,000 people, which was just about the population of the town. Of course, there would have been people from across the river and people from Wellsville, and everybody saw Floyd that could. And they finally, closed the doors late that night, and that was the end of the circus. But Floyd was then shipped back to Oklahoma. The family put on a funeral for him, which was described as being the largest funeral ever held in Oklahoma. There are aerial photographs of the cars parked at the cemetery that looked like it was an amusement park. I mean, just literally dozens and dozens and dozens of cars. There were stories of people fighting over, fist fighting over positions to see the coffin and that sort of thing. So it was quite an event.
After they leave Buffalo, New York, they head towards Oklahoma via Dillonvale, Ohio, where Adam Ricchetti has family. So as they're coming at 3 a.m. on a foggy morning through Wellsville, Ohio, at Coots Avenue, the Silver Switch, Floyd at the helm, they crash the vehicle. Floyd crashes into a telephone pole. Once that happens, the decision is made that the men would hide up onto the hillside. This would be Adam Ricchetti and Floyd would hide on the hillside while the ladies, Beulah Baird, Rose Baird, would take the vehicle into town to get it fixed, and they would meet up later. What happens is the men go up on the hillside, Beulah walks to Wellsville, gets a tow truck, comes back, picks up Rose, and they take the vehicle into East Liverpool, where there's an all-night service station to work on the car. They never get to see Floyd or Ricchetti again. That's the beginning of the end of the final run of Pretty Boy Floyd. Once the men get up onto the hillside, around 9 a.m. in the morning, they get spotted by a gentleman that lives along Coots Avenue. His name is Joe Fryman. Once Fryman and his son-in-law spots them, they decide to go up onto the hillside and investigate what they're doing up there. They get up on the hill and they run into Floyd and Ricchetti, who say they're there to get their picture taken with a couple lady friends. They're just waiting on them. Fryman and his son-in-law say they're just there to check on the pear trees. They leave, but Fryman's still not convinced that they're not up to any good. So they run into Lon Israel. It happens to be the man that lives up on the hill above where they're camping out. Mr. Israel decides he's going to call Chief Fultz of Wellsville. Chief Fultz is working by himself. He's got a couple guys around there, one of them being Grover Potts, who may or may not have been a prisoner at the time, and the other man named William Irwin. He decides to deputize them and take them with him. Once they do that, they end up over at the Silver Switch. They don't know where to go. They run into Israel at the intersection of Campground Road and Coots Avenue. Israel tells them that they could get to where the men are if they go down the path from his house. So they go to the top of the path. As they're walking down, now this would be Lon Israel, Chief Fultz, William Irwin, and Grover Potts. As they're walking down the pathway, out steps Floyd with an automatic .45. Tells Fultz to put his hands up. Fultz says, "Why would I do that? I'm just going to work at the brickyard." Floyd tells him, "Just keep your hands where I can see you," and they continue down the pathway. As they do that, they come across a guy on a blanket. The guy on the blanket's going to be Ricchetti. Ricchetti, laying on his left side on his elbow. Fultz says, "It looks like you're taking it easy." Ricchetti says, "Yeah," and he laughs a little bit. Floyd says, "Don't listen to him, he's a cop, so shoot him." It was then that they get into this gun battle. Now you got to picture this, because there's three men standing there in the middle of all this with no weapons. Fultz has a little .32 caliber pistol, much like this one here. And that's what he's fighting two men. One has a Tommy gun and two .45 automatics. The other has a .45 automatic pistol. And he fights him off with a .32 caliber pistol. As the fight goes on, the men are scrambling, and if you can imagine, this goes on long enough that the three men who are unarmed have time to get to the Israel house, gather shotguns, come back and join the gunfight. As they do that, Floyd is escaping up a pathway past the Israel house, and Grover Potts takes a shot at him with one barrel of the double-barrel shotgun. Floyd turns around and fires back, striking Grover Potts in the shoulder, putting him down. The other men don't continue after Floyd. couple of them stop to help Grover Potts while Chief Fultz is chasing Adam Ricchetti towards the Israel house. Now it's said here that Chief Fultz had 1 round left in his .32, shoots at Ricchetti and misses, hitting the Israel house. But that's when Ricchetti turned around and gave up. Fultz takes him into custody, the other men help him, and they get Grover Potts and they leave and go to the bottom of the hill. Now mind you, they don't know that this is Charles Floyd or Adam Ricchetti, just 2 men with guns. Once they get back to Wellsville, they take Adam Ricchetti back to Wellsville. It's found out there later. Well, Adam Ricchetti starts telling stories about who he is and gives them false names, and that he just met the other guy, Floyd. But it just so happens that Chief Ray Long out of Jefferson County Sheriff's Office stopped by the Wellsville Police Department, and he says, I think I recognize that guy. Goes to his car and gets his Burns Detective Agency book, and he opens it up and he finds Adam Ricchetti matching that description, and right beside him is Pretty Boy Floyd. So now they know who the men are. Now this takes time. This doesn't just happen in a minute. During all this, Charles Floyd has made his way up and over the Peterson Road area, and he's traveling along what were fields back then, maybe wheat fields, cornfields. There weren't as many trees that's there today. He's making his way over, and he spots what would be the only machines around at the Peterson garage. Floyd, after running from the upper path, made his way down along this wood line, through the yard of Vivian Ammon, and into the William and Thomas Peterson garage. There, William and Thomas were working on a vehicle, along with their friend George McMillan, who had stopped by to get a part for his vehicle. Floyd, talking to the Peterson brothers, offered $5 for a ride to Youngstown. William Peterson decided he would take him. However, William's mother came outside and said that he wouldn't have time to get the vehicle he's working on across the river, so he couldn't take him. George McMillan, at that time, offered to take Floyd, and Floyd upped the price to $10 for that trip. George took him up on his offer. It was there that they get into George McMillan's Model T and they head up Campground Road north. Now, while this is going on, and Floyd's getting over there, all this drama is happening in Wellsville because they now know who they're looking for. It's even there that the fire chief makes a trip from Wellsville all the way to Lisbon to start informing the sheriff's office up there who they're looking for. It's found out that George McMillan takes him in his Model T. So the people in Lisbon, the sheriff's office and the Lisbon Police Department, are now looking for a Ford Model T with Floyd in it and George McMillan. In the meantime, Floyd and McMillan are traveling on Campground Road. They end up taking a few of the side streets, and when they're keeping off the main road. When they get up and they cross Wino Road, they get onto Yeager Drive and they make their way back down McIntosh Road. During this time, it's said that Floyd asked George McMillan, I reckon you know who I am? And George says, no, I don't. And he pulls back his jacket and shows him the .45, and he says, I'm Floyd, Pretty Boy Floyd. You're hearing about me on the radio and in the newspapers. It makes McMillan a little bit nervous then. But they continue on a little bit further, and Floyd is telling a story about the shootout in Wellsville with McMillan. They discuss it just a little bit. Once they get down to Township Line Road, almost where it intersects with Route 45, McMillan decides he's going to play with the choke to get up this little grade of a hill, stalls the vehicle, and it appears that they've run out of gas. So Floyd gets out. McMillan even says later in his testimony how he thought Floyd was a pretty strong guy because he moved the car basically by himself off the road. It was discussed that they were going to go up and find gasoline. They happened to be at the home of James Baum. Now James Baum and another fella are stacking wood out back. Floyd and McMillan start up the coal road behind the house. As they get up there, Floyd's telling him, listen, don't give it away. Just want to get gasoline. And McMillan agrees, and they go up and they ask James Baum for gasoline. James Baum says, listen, I can't give you any gasoline, I don't have any. And you can't siphon it out of my car. It's one of those kind of, you can't do that to. He said, but I'll take you to get gasoline. So they pile into Mr. Baum's Nash. It's a tan Nash. As they start out and they head north on Route 45, Floyd sits up from the back seat with his .45 in his hand and says, listen, old man, I got news for you. We're not going to go get gasoline. I want you to stay off the main roads and turn as quick as you can to the left. That would happen to be Osborne Road today. As they make that journey down Osborne Road, which is a long way, they come to what was Steubenville Pike Road today. And at that time, Highlandtown Lake didn't exist. You could turn left and keep going on the road, or you could turn right, which brings you right past Bethel Church. Now, Bethel Church is specifically mentioned in the transcripts. So they come up, they turned right and come up to Bethel Church, and immediately the next right, which is Alder Lake Road. So you come down Alder Lake Road, they follow it all the way back, which is Glasgow Road. As they come through Glasgow, they cross 45 again, and it dead ends. So they turn around, come back out to 45, and they head north through West Point. And as they're coming through West Point, they head down Route 45 into Lisbon, Ohio. This would be where today's times would be Pondy's Restaurant. There was a bridge right there at the restaurant. I suppose back then it was a wooden bridge. Today it's a concrete bridge. As they come down through there, there's a roadblock. That's because the fire chief from Wellsville had told Lisbon police about who they're looking for, and they're on the lookout for a Model T Ford. George Hayes, who was a deputy for the sheriff's office, and Charlie Patterson from the Lisbon Police Department, they got together in a vehicle and they came to block that roadway. However, here comes a tan Nash down the road, and Floyd sees that roadblock. As they're coming down towards the roadblock, Floyd tells James Baum to turn left and do the works there. It turns out to be a dead end because they have a boxcar blocking the roadway. So they turn around, they come back out, and they head back the same direction they came, up towards Stooksbury Road or Roller Coaster Road. As they're getting up there, a couple cars got between them, but George Hayes and Charlie Patterson decided to follow that car, find out why they turned around. As they get up through there, the other two cars go straight on Route 45, but Floyd and Baum and George McMillan go left onto Stooksbury, and then again left onto Roller Coaster Road. It was at that point there that Floyd tells Baum to pull off to the side of the road and let that car behind us passes. That car doesn't pass, it pulls up behind him. Not directly behind him, but close enough behind him. George Hayes says in his testimony that as he reached down to get the door handle of his car to step out, a bullet come through the window, would have hit him right between the eyes and just missed him. Then another gunfight starts. Charlie Patterson steps out of the passenger side and he opens fire. George Hayes steps out the driver's side, he opens fire on the vehicle. Later it's discussed that there are 5 bullet holes in James Baum's car. As this is going on, Floyd's shooting back at them. James Baum gets out of the car, driver, with his hands up, and he gets shot in the leg by Charlie Patterson. McMillan gets out with his hands up and runs to the front of the car, but Floyd is using him as cover. As gunfight's going on, Floyd makes his way across the street and into the woods. Those woods were known as Spence's Woods because of Spence's farm back in that time. Now, as this is going on, Floyd has made his way down into that wooded section. McMillan gets captured by Charlie and Deputy Hayes and taken into custody. James Baum is left there, told to wait till the next police come, as they're taking McMillan back into town. As they do that, McMillan's pleading his case, trying to say, listen, we're not part of this. Mr. Baum has been kidnapped. We're just, we're not part of this. It took a little convincing, but they turn around and come back and they start to administer aid to Mr. Baum. The neighbors in that neighborhood were actually already there giving some first aid to Mr. Baum. While this is going on, Floyd's making his getaway through the woods. And keep in mind, it's starting to rain and it's starting to get dark. This is around 5 o'clock, 5:30 in October. So it's starting to get dark and it's starting to rain. Floyd is making his way through the woods. They're a little nervous and apprehensive about running into the woods to chase Floyd. In the meantime, they get the word back that what's going on, and there are little posses of men going around. This is where you see the pictures later of 4 guys standing with shotguns and so on. Some of those guys actually turn out to be firemen, some of them from Wellsville, some from Liverpool, some from Lisbon. But they're all local guys just out trying to help find this bad guy. That's who patrol the road all through the night. If this is Spence's Woods, this is Ellen Conkle's house, and it happens to be 8 miles as the crow flies. That's a long ways, and Floyd is not seen for another day, almost a day and a half, and that's because he travels through the Spence's Woods all the way to make his way over that way towards Spruceville Road. However, What some people don't realize is that Floyd actually didn't just eat at the Conkle House. He stopped at another place along the way. It was the Robinson farm. If you follow the creek from Spence's Woods, it ends up at the backside of the Robinson farm. This would be Robert Robinson and his daughter Mabel. Now, Floyd makes his way to the Robinson house, knocks on the door, and he's hungry. He wants to wash up. Mabel, she allows him to wash his face and hands and feeds him a sandwich. He sits on their step outside and eats that sandwich. From there, she comes out with some ginger cookies and apples. They do have an apple orchard at the Robinson farm. She feeds him, or gives him the cookies and the apples and the sandwich. He eats it. He wants a ride to Youngstown or East Liverpool. They can't give it to him. He goes along his way north towards Spruceville. But while this is going on with Floyd, what else is happening is now the word has gotten out about Floyd being seen. Once Floyd leaves the Robinson farm, Farmer Robinson is talking to his neighbor, who ends up being Clyde Birch. Clyde Birch is a constable for St. Clair Township. So while he's talking to Clyde, Clyde knows what's going on. Robert Robinson didn't know anything about it. They get together, get into a car, and they start out towards the White House filling station. This would be out on Route 7. Now, they get out there and they find the feds, and the federal officer happens to be Agent Hall, and he just hangs up from talking to Melvin Purvis, who is at the Travelers Hotel in downtown East Liverpool. When Robinson and Clyde Birch start telling Agent Hall about the man that fits the description and where he was, Hall calls back Purvis down at the Travelers and tells him that information. Purvis says that they're on the way out there, and they tell Agent Hollis, who is at the Travelers Hotel, contact the East Liverpool City Police, get some men to help us and to meet us out there at the White House filling station. So Chief Huey McDermott gets the call from the agent, and once he gets Chester Smith, he gets Glenn Curley Montgomery, and he gets Herman Roth together, and he starts issuing them weapons. He gives Chester Smith a .32-20 Winchester rifle. He gives Herman Roth a .32-20 Winchester rifle. He takes his .38 with him, and he gives Curley Montgomery a shotgun, a 12-gauge shotgun. They head out towards the White House filling station on Route 7. They take the path up through St. Clair Avenue till they get out into today Calcutta, Spruceville area. Once they get to Route 7, they come along the White House filling station. There's two men there. Our guys stop to talk to them, thinking they may be feds. They turn out not to be. Those guys said, well, there was a car with Michigan plates that just left 2 minutes ago, and they head down Route 7 further on out. Well, they catch up to that car at about the Clarkson Route 7 intersection. And as it's said in the transcripts, Colonel Montgomery says that the chief horned that car, and when he did that, they pulled over. Well, it happened to be Melvin Purvis come out of the car, come back and talk to our guys, described what was going on and who they're looking for. Our guys, Curley Montgomery, happens to know this area very well. He knew all the farmers. He said he would lead the way. And as they take off with the Liverpool car leading the way, the Fed car following them, they turn right onto Clarkson Road and then make their way over to the Bell Schoolhouse Road. Now, this is going on. Floyd has left the Robinson farm and is making his way towards the Conkle farm. He does this by way of walking through the fields and possibly following what is known as Ware Road. Ware Road dead ends at Beaver Creek, and if you come out on the other side, it ends up at the back door of Ellen Conkle's house. Just north of that would have been the Jim Anderson farm. Now, it is later found that testimony from Jim Anderson said that he could see down through the field a subject walking across the field towards the road, fitting kind of that description. And what stood out about him is that the man didn't have a hat on. The federal agents and the city guys are now traveling up and down what would have been Bell Schoolhouse Road, where the Bell Schoolhouse was, which happens to be directly across from Ware Road. It was in that area that they determined that, in talking to different farmers along the way, that they determined they needed to go back to Clarkson, come across Clarkson, and come south on Spruceville Road. As they do that, that's where they meet up with Mr. Anderson, and he gives them that information. They continue on down now to what would be the Conkle farm. If you pause there, follow Floyd, what he's doing is he has now made his way to the Conkle farm. He has come to the back door of the farm, and he has told Mrs. Conkle that he was hungry, he was wanting some meat and potatoes, kind of a meal. She just thought he was a tramp, didn't think much of it. It was kind of odd that he was in a suit. He gives her a story that he was hunting in the woods for squirrels with his brother. They got separated, he got lost. She knew that wasn't going to be true, because who hunts in the woods at night and in a suit? But she takes him in anyhow, and she feeds him some meat and potatoes, I believe, pork chops and potatoes, gives him some rice pudding, which he doesn't eat. He tells her at the end of that meal that it was fit for a king, and he wants to pay her. She doesn't want the money, but he slides a dollar bill underneath the plate. He asks for a ride to Youngstown or East Liverpool. He wants to catch a bus line. She says she can't take him, but maybe her brother can, and her brother, Stuart Dyke, and his wife are out in the field and they're husking corn. He says he'll wait by the car, asked her if she had a book of matches, and she gave him some matches, and he took the newspaper and he went out to the car by the corn crib. Now, as he's waiting by the car, or waiting in the car actually, Stuart Dyke come out of the field, talks to Ellen, and Ellen explains what's going on. So Stuart Dyke walks over to the car, and he's talking to Floyd. Floyd asks him again, he wants to get a ride to Youngstown. Stuart Dyke says it's too late in the day, he can't take him to Youngstown, but he can take him as far as Clarkson. Floyd agrees. Stuart gets in the vehicle along with Floyd, and Stuart's wife, Florence, she gets in the car also. Just as they're backing away from the corn crib, here comes our guys down into the Kunkel farm. The Liverpool car leading the way and the feds directly behind it. Floyd sees them and orders Stuart Dyke to drive back to where they started, behind the corn crib. They pull up. Our guys had spotted Floyd. They get out of the vehicle. Floyd gets out of the car, and you can see underneath the corn crib, and as he's running back and forth, he's peeking around the corner. They spot who he is. They're yelling for him to come out. Now, if you can picture this, 4 federal agents and 4 East Liverpool policemen, and they're kind of horseshoed around that corn crib, coming at Floyd, ordering him to step out. He's confused. He's not sure what way to go. He decides he's going to run through, maybe try to get behind the garage to get cover and to get away into the wooded section behind the field. Floyd makes the run, begins up over the little small rise from the corn crib. The men yell for him to halt. He doesn't halt. They open fire on him. Floyd goes down, gets up, continues on, and collapses. As the men are running up onto Floyd, Floyd has a .45 caliber pistol in his right hand, and they remove the firearm from his hand. As they get him, he's trying to get up. They keep him down. They see he has another one. They remove another .45 from his waistband. So Purvis approaches Floyd while he's down. The men have disarmed him, kept him down on the ground. Purvis starts asking him, questioning him who he is. He tells him his name is Murray or Murphy or something of that nature. And then Purvis says, "Aren't you Pretty Boy Floyd?" And he says, "Yes, I'm Charles Arthur Floyd." And Purvis begins to start questioning about the Kansas City massacre. As he does that, Floyd denies the massacre and tells him to hell with Union Station, and he doesn't answer his questions, calls Purvis a couple names. Purvis decides to take Stuart Dyke and one of the agents, and they get into a car together, and they drive to Clarkson to phone for an ambulance. What they do is they get to Clarkson, and whether or not they call for the ambulance or not, it's not said, but they call J. Edgar Hoover, and they inform him as to what happened. In the meantime, the city police and the other agents that are still present start talking to Floyd about who he is and what's going on, and Floyd's asking him about Ad, meaning Adam Richetti. Where's Ad? Where's Eddie? Again, talking about Richetti. Our guys know nothing of that, and the feds know nothing of Richetti or what he's talking about. Chief McDermott begins talking to him, and he says, "How bad are you hurt?" And Floyd tells McDermott, "You got me twice. I'm going." And it was about that point that Floyd passes on. Our guys pick him up, carrying him down to a tree near the roadway, and they wait for the ambulance that Purvis went to retrieve. However, when Purvis comes back, he discovers that Floyd's already dead and says, "Hell, just put him in the car, in the state car, and we'll take him downtown ourselves." So they load him up into the federal vehicle, put him into the back seat, sit beside him, drive him downtown to the Sturgis house, where he is right away begins to be shown, put on display once cleaned up by the funeral director, Sturgis.
We have a historical event that really happened. We know when it happened, we know where it happened, we know who the participants were, as far as 4 bureau agents, 4 members of the East Liverpool Police Department. We know pretty well how they were armed, based on reports both from the transcripts of the coroner's inquest and from the bureau records. We know that there were likely 2 32-20 Winchesters in the hands of Liverpool officers. We know that the chief of the Liverpool Police Department had his trusty .38. We believe that the 4th Liverpool officer was armed with a shotgun.
Right, Curly Montgomery.
And as far as the FBI agents, Purvis had his revolver, claimed afterwards that he had fired 6 rounds from it. We know that there was at least 1, maybe 2 Thompson submachine guns in the hands of the bureau agents. So a lot of shooting. And in fact, I've heard estimates of anywhere from 50 to 100 rounds fired before Floyd was on the ground. So we know a lot, but what we don't know is how to resolve certain issues, certain controversies. And as I've told you before, I think it's been a cottage industry, at least in this county, of making stuff up about the Floyd incident for the last 80 years.
Okay, so that leads us to doing a range test. I know Rick has gone out with a range finder, and based on the transcripts and the distances that each individual in the transcripts had mentioned, one would say they were 20 yards from this, another 500 feet from that, and we tried to put those together. You went out with a range finder and you got us pretty much an average distance based on everything, and it's really close if you look at some of the pictures from back then as to where they marked areas. We're right within there. So that is going to be within about 35 yards, give or take, maybe a few yards, okay, five yards maybe. So,
and then it looked like it was, with laser from the transcripts, about 50 yards is where he dropped. It's rated
at the end, yes. So that would make sense with the way they described that. He goes down, gets up, continues, and collapses.
Exactly.
Okay, but he's never shot again.
Right.
Okay, so we need to go out there. We need to go out to the range. We need to do let's take some paper targets. Let's do a probability test. Let's do that. Let's set up the targets. We'll go back to 35 yards. And what do you say we take the 32-20? We'll take that. We'll take a 45 Tommy gun and a 38 pistol. And we discussed earlier about the shotguns. Other than the wound in the center of his back in the autopsy, this is based on the autopsy, the only wound of a shotgun blast, he has a piece of buckshot in almost the center of his back. And it's recorded in the testimony that when they hijacked James Baum's car, he had blood on the back seat.
Exactly.
So it's very possible that wound, he obtained that wound while he was in the shootout with the Wellsville police at the Silver Switch in Wellsville, Ohio. Okay, so let's forget the shotguns. Okay, that's the only wound there. There were shotguns at the Kunkel farm, but there's no other thing in the back like that.
And that one wasn't one that would have killed him anyhow.
Exactly. So
rule that out.
We'll do the 45. We'll do the 32-20. We'll do the probability test at 35 yards. Maybe even move out a little further. And then let's do a penetration test. Let's see if a 32-20 rifle at 35 yards is even capable of penetrating a body all the way through like that. And and leaving the size of wounds that the pictures.
We'll just get some meat.
Yeah.
A meat and a rib. Excuse me, because we know that a rib was broke, his 8th rib on its one side. And
the autopsy says the wound comes through takes out his pancreas and exits and takes the 8th rib and
Okay.
breaks it. So yeah, let's do that. So we'll set some ribs on the end of that meat, and we'll fire from those same distances with the 45 and the
Yeah.
32-20.
See what it does.
Sound good?
Typical Saturday.
Yeah. All right, let's go do it.
All right. This is a 32-20. It's a Remington, it's not the Winchester. We do have a Winchester that we're going to use for our testing. This is a Remington. This is the bullet for it. And as you can see, the barrel length's a lot longer. It's going to be a lot more accurate. It's going to stabilize the bullet a lot more. You're going to get a lot more velocity out of it. That's why you can get a lot more distance in your shots and a lot more accuracy in your shots. Here's the 45. This is similar to the gun that Pretty Boy Floyd would have been carrying. It's 45 ACP. Here's your 45 ACP bullet. Your velocities out of this, as you can see, this is a short barrel. It's only going to get you 25, 30 feet of any accuracy whatsoever. The bullet will be traveling very slow, 820 feet per second. This is what Pretty Boy Floyd had, was in 1911. He did not shoot the day of the shooting. This is a 38. This would have been an issue gun for the police departments and the FBI. This is what they would use as their sidearm. It used a 38 round. Short barrel again. Not going to get a lot of distance. It is a little bit longer than the 45, as you can see. So it'll be a little bit more accurate, a little bit further. It's probably a 50-yard gun too. May give or take, depending on the shooter. This is your Thompson. They had some machine guns that were fully auto and stuff. This is not a fully auto. It's semi-automatic, which just means you just keep pulling the trigger. It's got a 16-inch barrel. The velocities would be a little, it shoots the 45 ACP. The velocities out of this would be a little bit more than the 1911 because of that. It's got more time to burn the powder and build energy. It'll have longer rifling in here, which stabilizes the bullet. So it's a little bit further run. You can probably get about 50 yards out of this gun. Okay, we're going to take these out to the range. We got some paper silhouette targets we're going to set up. We're going to do a probability shot. We're going to take each gun, we're going to shoot them at a target at the distance that he was shot at to see what the probability was of each one of these weapons hitting him and how accurately they would hit him. Once we're done with that, we got some torso parts we're going to set up and we're going to shoot these into it to see which one had enough force and energy to do the penetration to shoot.
This one nicked here, it come through here, so that's out. Okay. This round, let's try to follow it here. It's through. Yep, it's through. And it took a rip. Based on what we did at the range, what we ended up doing is taking the 32-20 Winchester, the 45 caliber Tommy gun, and a 38 pistol, and we did a probability test out here. That's with the paper targets at 35 yards. We ended up shooting 6 rounds between 3 people, taking turns, 18 rounds total. Out of that, The 38 caliber pistol only struck the kill zone at 35 yards 4 times, out of 18 rounds. Out of the 32-20, it struck 13 times, and then out of the 45 caliber Tommy gun, in the semi-auto mode, it hit 17 out of 18 times. So we moved on to the penetration test. What we did is the same distance at 35 yards, and we just used the 45 caliber Tommy gun and the 32-20. That's where we decided that it's got to be one of those 2 weapons that's caused those wounds.
Yeah.
So out of that, when we shot it, both the 32-20 and the 45 were capable at 35 yards to not only penetrate the meat, but to break the rib and exit, not stay in the meat. And so we decided to go ahead and back up. And we backed up to approximately 50 yards and did the same thing. Now, for sure, we know the Tommy gun actually penetrated that meat at 50 yards, breaking the rib and still exiting, leaving
That's amazing.
a nice size wound in
Yeah.
that meat. More consistent with what we found or based on the pictures of Floyd's body, would be consistent with about that size. Agree?
Yeah.
So what's our conclusion, guys? What do you think? My personal opinion is the wounds in Floyd's body, based on our test, were of a 45
I agree. And where they said that they riddled him at the end, that we proved here, there have been so many holes in the picture.
Especially like a fully automatic mode, it would have ripped his body apart. And we've seen Floyd's body with the blanket draped down and no shirt on, and there's no wounds consistent with that anywhere. A single shot which went through his forearm, separating both bones, and the autopsy report doesn't talk about the bones being broken. So it went through there and then entered his side and exited at the 8th rib on this side. We figured that wound penetrated both and exited. And then the other wound was directly above his right buttock and come out kind of like it skimmed him as he was going down. It wasn't life-threatening wounds in there at all, based on the autopsy report. And this shot being one shot is all based on Floyd himself, because Floyd says, "You got me twice."
I was given a copy of some photographs from the time, and also the report that was generated at the time of the autopsy, as well as the transcripts from the trial, and also as far as some research that was done utilizing the variety of different weapons that could have been utilized in the shooting of Pretty Boy Floyd. After reading through the report, I tried to put the location of the wounds as are described in the report on a diagram to kind of get a visual idea of where the wounds are. And then I correlate the path of the wounds as described in the report, which correlate with what the person who did the examination, how they line them up. So in looking at the various type of wounds and the wound paths as described, I then generated these diagrams and tried to come up with an idea of the wound paths, whether there were any injuries that could have come in tandem to one another. There's definitely 3 through-and-through wounds. For a total of 6 wounds on the body, and also there was reference to a buckshot that was present underneath the skin, kind of in the midline of the lower back, which seemed to correlate to a previous injury that he had, not from the final interaction that he had with law enforcement that day. There was also, of course, the mention of the wound in the right axilla corresponding to the trocar injury, which would have been from the fact that he was embalmed prior to having the examination done. So having a trocar injury, that can create some internal alteration of organs just from the procedure, the trocar procedure itself. The other thing that I found that was interesting was that they said that the tips of the fingers were abraded. So I don't know if he himself had tried to cover up fingerprints on his fingers as a way to try to avoid being printed and identified. But I did find that interesting as well. Based on the witness accounts of what happened, it appears everything did come from the right. So taking that as de facto and not being actually able to look at the entry wounds themselves, although you can see in some of the pictures you can get a little bit of an idea, but they're black and white, you can't really evaluate too much the lividity pattern, in other words the amount, if there's a wound margin abrasion around them or anything like that, as far as differentiating between an entrance and an exit wound. The reason I think that the wound in the right back was a wound that came after going through the forearm is because when that projectile entered the torso in the right back and at the 10th and 11th ribs. The 10th and 11th ribs at that location are right next to one another. There's no way that a projectile, no matter really what caliber, could have quote unquote slipped in between, because even there they're going to have to nick those ribs in some location in some way. And if you're talking about the type of caliber of projectiles at the disposal of the law enforcement and the type of weapons that they used, there's going to be some damage to those ribs unless there's some other thing that bullet went through before it came into the torso. So in other words, that bullet probably went through the right forearm with or without fracture to the bones in the right forearm, would have slowed down or taken away enough kinetic energy to where it would have not shattered the ribs as it's described as shattering the left 8th rib as another bullet exits. If those weapons and bullets still have enough energy to shatter on an exit, it would have completely shattered on an entrance if it had not gone through another target prior to entering the trunk. He could have fallen after he got the first injury, and because it would have stunned him at the very least, but then he has not lost any blood at that point, so he's definitely able to go on for a while, but then he's losing blood, and so then he could have gotten shot again, obviously, before he goes down for the final time. But then at that point he's got enough blood loss that he's not getting back up. So based on my calculations, that being his height, his estimated blood volume, the wounds that he received, the damage to the internal organs that he received, and the damage that he did not receive to the internal organs, I would think, in my opinion, that from the time he was first shot until the time that he dies would be several minutes, less than 10, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. In my opinion, the type of caliber wound that would have caused the wounds described, and especially at the distances that were described, it would have been more likely the .45 caliber. I don't think that the smaller caliber projectiles would have been able to create as much devastating injury still to be able to go through and through at those distances, and especially what really is important to me is the fact that that 8th rib was shattered on its exit.
You reside at?
East Circle, RD1.
On Clarkson and Spruceville Road.
Yes.
Tell me, in your own words, Mrs. Conkle, what you were doing when you first saw him and he first came to you.
It was just about 10 minutes to 3 when he came to the house. He wanted something to eat, said he was hungry and lost, that he and his brother had been out hunting squirrels. They got separated, so I told him he surely wouldn't want to be hunting squirrels at night. He said, to be honest, I have been drinking and got too much to drink, and I got in wrong. I got him a lunch. He asked for meat. When he was done, he said it was a lunch fit for a king, and he offered me $1. He was here almost an hour. I knew he wasn't telling the truth and that he hadn't been drinking. I didn't know they were looking for him, but I was afraid of him. He wanted me to take him to Youngstown. I told him I couldn't. I told him if he would wait here until 4 o'clock, I would see that he got down to the Route 7. I didn't want him in the neighborhood overnight. He said that he looked like a wild man. I didn't tell him he did or didn't. I just smiled. Then he said, I'll go down in the car and wait. He got in my brother's car first. He asked me for a newspaper, said he wanted to see the news, and he asked for some matches.
Did you see anything then of what the officers did when they arrived?
I was standing out in the backyard. I seen it about all. He sat there until my brother and his wife came up. He told my brother that I had said he would give me a ride out to the bus line. He said to my brother, drive me back to the corn crib. They were looking for me. My brother just pulled back to where he had been, opened the door, and asked him to leave the car.
What did you see after that?
That was all. He just left the car and started to run back across the fields towards the woods.
Did you see him pull a gun?
No,
Did you hear the officers call him to halt?
no,
Did you see them run to the garage from their cars?
I could see them running around the corn crib.
You hear the shooting, of course.
Oh, I heard the shooting.
How far did he run before they opened fire?
About 500 feet before he dropped.
Well, we came back from Wellsville, and imagine it was about 5 or 10 minutes to 3. Just as we stepped in the door, Chief handed us guns. Asked him where we were going, said we're going out the highway, that something the Department of Justice men had called in. We continued on Route 7 almost to Clarkson Road. We come to the Department of Justice car. The chief, he horned on them and they stopped. Mr. Purvis aimed to try to get on the other side of him to head him off. Nobody in the car knew the road to Clarkson, and I volunteered to direct them down there. Our car took the lead. And we went to Clarkson first, and from there down to Levi Hickman's farm. He had stated that he had not seen him, but the Constable Birch had been there shortly before and stated that Floyd had been seen down around that Bell Schoolhouse. But then they said that they thought maybe he had crossed towards the William Stouffer farm. So I inquired if it wouldn't be better to go in on the Clarkson-Spruceville Road, and he said it would. We stopped first at the Jim Anderson farm. He was plowed in the field back from the road approximately 200 yards. We had asked him if he had seen a man approximately my build going along the road or had seen him crossing any of the fields. He said he had seen a man about 1:30 of that description, without a hat, walking towards Spruceville on the road. We started on and stopped a bunch of men working down in the field. Mr. Purvis and 2 of his men went down there and talked to them, but they had never seen anybody of the description of Floyd. We then stopped at Mr. Welsh's farm and inquired if he had seen anybody. He had not. We continued on down the road towards Spruceville. As we came to the Conkle farm, I noticed standing in the back of the machine that was parked on the opposite side of the corn crib, this Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, standing there without a hat on.
Did you recognize him as Pretty Boy?
I recognized him right away. And when he saw our car, he jumped back in the back of the automobile. I hollered to the chief to stop. The car drove back along the side of the corn crib, then Floyd jumped out with a gun in his hand.
Could you see the gun when he jumped out of the car?
Yes.
Where were you standing then?
I was standing almost right in the driveway where it went up.
And you could see the gun in his hand?
Yes, he ran back and forth, as if he was trying to make up his mind which end of the corn crib to come around first. Mr. Purvis called, "Floyd, come to the road. If you don't, we'll shoot." Immediately afterwards, I think almost everybody hollered halt. He didn't halt. He ran with a swinging kind of half-turning motion, as though he was trying to dodge or sideslip any shots were fired at him. As he came to his high raise, he kind of cut sideways like he had been hit in the arm. And he ran approximately, I suppose to be about 20 yards before he fell on his left side. As I ran in, he pulled a .45 automatic up on his right hand. He was reaching with his left hand for a gun and back on the right side. It was another .45 automatic. I grabbed his left hand and held his head down. Herman Roth came in over my left shoulder and grabbed the gun out from his belt. The first thing that was said to Floyd that I recall was a direct question as to his activity in the Kansas City massacre. Floyd made no definite answer, only profanity. He was questioned several times and answered with profanity. He seemed very defiant all the time right up until he was almost gone. I asked him if his name was Charles Pretty Boy Floyd. He said, "Yes, that's my name. I'm Floyd."